All right, we are very excited to be here today with Kylie Buckner. Now, Kylie Buckner is a registered nurse, and she has a master's degree in nursing education. She has more than 18 years of experience as a nurse in the neonatal intensive care unit, or the NICU, in labor delivery and in OBGYN, as well as in pediatrics. She has dedicated her life to caring for people as a nurse and to gain an in-depth understanding of the challenges of adopting a plant-based lifestyle. She specializes in helping people talk with their healthcare providers about their plant-based transition. She's also a certified yoga teacher, and she's been 100% plant-based for 6 years, and we're going to learn about that today. She's also a coach at Mastering Diabetes, and she provides support to our members every single day. She's also my wife, and I'm a very lucky man. So thank you so much for being here with us today, Kylie.
Thank you. It's really great to be here, and I'm excited to be a part of this. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Okay. So let's start at the top here. Can you tell us a little bit about your transition to a plant-based diet? What motivated you to want to become a plant eater in the first place?
Sure. So prior to making a transition to a plant-based diet, I was eating what I thought was a really healthy diet. In fact, so much so that oftentimes my coworkers would tease me about the snacks that were in the break room at the hospital where I worked, that I wouldn't eat those things. And so I always felt really committed to health as a nurse. And when I first started learning about the benefits of a plant-based diet, it was at a time in my life when I was going through a lot of personal transitions, and I actually came upon the book, The China Study, and I read the book, and I just remember feeling like it all just made so much sense. The information provided there and the science behind it just really resonated for me. And I remember thinking, as a healthcare provider, I felt really kind of angry that this information wasn't more readily available to people in the healthcare world. It kind of went against a lot of the ways that we were taught to help teach people how to eat, and in particular, people with chronic disease. So for me, it really made a lot of sense. I really appreciated the fact that the idea behind a plant-based diet would allow you to reverse and reduce inflammation in your body, would help protect your body from long-term health risks. And I was really excited about that. So I started my journey, and it took me some time to navigate becoming a plant-based eater. But overall, the benefits have been amazing, and I've really enjoyed exploring this path and understanding more and more over the years about all of the benefits of a plant-based approach.
I love this. So, you also have a very extensive background, in pediatric nursing in particular. And one of the things that, you've explained to me personally is about your experience with children who get diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in the hospital and their families. And can you go into a little bit of detail here about what happens to a child who gets diagnosed with type 1 diabetes? What's the thought process, and what's the first information that they receive when they're in the hospital in most cases?
Sure. This was really eye-opening to me when I started spending more time in pediatrics. What I saw was children were coming in, they were getting diagnosed, they had very high blood glucose level. Their families were given a lot of information in a really short period of time. This information was often very overwhelming, and all of a sudden these families were left with new equipment and giving injections to their child and a follow-up appointment with an endocrinologist. And in that, there was very little discussion about nutrition. There was discussion about food and carbohydrates and eating this and not that. And the primary food that I saw being offered to kids was a lot of fat-based foods, a lot of non-plant-based foods, a lot of meats, cheeses, eggs, things like that. And so from the very beginning of their diagnosis and life with type 1 diabetes, they were sort of instructed that those foods were the foods to eat. And in that time of transition, when you're learning so much about a new healthcare diagnosis or new something about your child, most people are willing to just take in whatever information and go with it. And so there was very little discussion about how fruits and vegetables and plant-based foods would come into that picture. The thing that surprised me a lot would be when kids would be given options of like a cheese snack versus an apple, and being told something like they were, if you eat the cheese, you don't need a shot. And if you eat the apple, you're going to need a shot. And it sort of like demonized the apple from the very beginning. And at that point, I was already plant-based, and I already had a very strong understanding of what the benefits of a plant-based diet would offer. And so for me, I would hear this, and it was just really frustrating because I felt like these kids were being given a choice that wasn't always fair. And, this was something that was very glaringly, sort of like was a glaring issue to me right away. But the standards of practice for somebody who's diagnosed newly with diabetes are to follow the specific plan, the specific protocol. So there's very little at this point that is done differently than was done, 10 or 15 years ago, even more, in working with people who are newly diagnosed with diabetes.
When people express that lifestyle change is difficult, what advice do you offer?
Oh, yes. I love this question. This is a great question because we hear this so much from people who are in our program and from people in the community. It's just too hard. It's too hard to make lifestyle changes. It's too hard to change my diet. And you're right. When you look at like your full lifestyle and look at overhauling or making a big change, that can look really hard. It can look really overwhelming. And, our brains don't really like making a lot of changes. Our brains really like taking like one path, the easiest path, the path of least resistance. So when you start inviting changes in, because in your mind, you've decided there's maybe some benefit to that change, sometimes your brain can really play tricks with you. So one of the best things that I recommend is to take a really slow and steady approach. We encourage people to go one meal, one step, one day at a time. And I remember when I was going through my plant-based transition, I sort of just started eliminating one food at a time. I was like, well, I'm not eating this food this week, so that's out of I didn't have chicken this week, so that's out. And it made it it took little bite-sized steps towards eventually looking at a diet that was focused on all plants. And I spent a lot of time working with new parents and people who have just had a baby. And, the thing about becoming a parent for the first time, for those of you who are parents, is that you probably remember that time in the hospital or if you had your baby at home, new baby in your life, and you're looking at this baby like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do with this baby? Nobody gave me an owner's manual for this child. And I'm supposed to become this person's resource, their parents. And it can be really overwhelming and you can be left with a lot of uncertainty. But you take the baby home and you start interacting and you start learning and you start with one diaper change and one feeding. And, you don't get all the information up front. You just sort of take it one step at a time. And I see this very similarly when we approach lifestyle change. When you're adopting a low-fat, plant-based whole food diet, it's a transition. It's a transition and it's a part of a journey. And so every single day you have the opportunity to begin again and to start again with a new mindset or, choose the mindset about how you want to approach that day. And, rather than looking at this whole big lifestyle change as a big global, tomorrow I have to just, be 100% plant-based, we start with one meal or one step at a time.
We hear a lot of people asking about when should they stop taking medications? How should they do that? How should they reduce them? What are your thoughts on this topic?
That's a great question. You're right. We do see this question come up a lot, and people are often wanting to, come off of their medication or wean down because the medication effects can be really uncomfortable. A lot of people experience unpleasant side effects, or end up, having to add more medication on over time. And so a lot of people feel they're, adding more medication, and sort of like this medication train that you're on to this place that we don't even know where it goes. And, from our approach, when you're making lifestyle changes to basically reverse or work on the insulin resistance that's at the bottom of what's causing you to need the medication in the first place. While you're in that transition of the lifestyle changes, the medication may be a really important part of your process, because it may keep you into safe values during that time frame. So the first thing to really understand that's really important is that your physician prescribed you that medication based on their best medical knowledge at the time. And because of that, we don't recommend going off any medication without medical supervision, without your physician's input, or at least their knowledge that this is something you want to try. And medication may be an option for you, and it may also be very temporary. So we recommend partnering with your physician to establish how and when they would wean you off of your medication. Keeping them informed of the changes that you're making, of your lifestyle changes, of your goals, and is a really important part of that process. One of the questions that we really recommend asking your physician is, what are the things that you would look for in order for me to come off of these medications? Engaging them so that they understand that that is a serious goal that you have, but also so that you can establish the parameters that you would be able to come off of the medication to begin with. Is it going to be an A1C level? Is it your blood glucose level? Is it a blood pressure value, weight loss, or possibly even a combination of those things? So what is the combination, or what is the information that your physician would like to see in order to say, oh, actually, this medication may no longer be serving you, and it's time to come off of that medication. Another really great question to ask your physician is, how can we work together to help me meet these goals? Working together with your physician and partnering with them is a really important part of this process. So we do see medication as being a temporary part of your transition, and as you're addressing lifestyle change, again, getting to the root cause of what is leading you to need the medication is really the most important part of the lifestyle change.
Okay, this is awesome. So here's another thing that happens all the time is that people just get frustrated when their doctor basically doesn't support their decision to eat a low-fat, plant-based, whole food diet, or even a plant-based diet in the first place, right? So it's not even a question about, when can I get off this medication? It's even before that. It's like, hey, this is the type of dietary strategy that I'd like to implement. Can we talk about this? Can we support it? And sometimes doctors are like, no, if it's not a low carbohydrate diet, I don't want to hear it. You're doing something dangerous, right? So people get frustrated when they hear this kind of thing. What would you recommend, to people who hear this message from their doctor or from, other medical professionals who maybe just, they're not bad people. They're great. They just don't understand, the plant-based methodology.
Yeah, that is another very common theme and something that we often hear. I've worked with so many physicians over the years, and our medical community is full of wonderful and inspiring people. And right now, there are some unfortunate barriers in nutrition for the medical community to understand the benefits of a low-fat, plant-based approach, and to see the connection between this approach and, reducing and reversing disease risk. So those disconnects can allow for those opportunities to come up where you're sitting with your physician and they are not in agreement with your plan. And first of all, understanding that that's okay. It's okay to disagree. There are times in life when we have to agree to disagree, and, you go to your doctor and you get the information that you need, and you get the lab results that you need, and you choose to eat the way that you want to eat. And that's okay. So that's one option that you have, to move forward. But, in considering that physicians are also very reasonable people, and most physicians are very willing to learn from their patients. And knowing that, sometimes it's just a disconnect in the amount of information or the information that they have. So one strategy is to approach your physician by starting off sharing what you've learned. So maybe you're taking your favorite book or an article or your favorite documentary, something that helped you make the connections between a plant-based lifestyle and your health. And ask them if they'd be willing to take a look at the information and, explain to them that this is something that you found, it really resonates for you. It's something that is really important that you are able to move forward with. And if you explain that to your physician and allow them the opportunity to inform themselves, there's a good chance that they're going to be willing to look at that information. And then you'll be coming at the interaction from an even playing field. So, they'll have the information you have when entering into the next conversation. The second thing would be to identify your goals, specific goals. Like, I want to lower my A1C. My goal is to reduce or eliminate my medication, to reduce my insulin use, to avoid developing diabetes at all if you're somebody living with prediabetes. So when you identify your goals, you're putting it out there and you're letting them know you're really serious about making changes in your life. And then the third step is to have a plan and let them know what your plan is. Let your physician know that you have a plan to either, maybe it includes exercise, adopt a plant-based diet. Maybe you want to join a coaching program. Like in some way, let them know that you're really engaged in your process to meet your goals.
This is really great information. This is very, very important information for people to hear, because we hear these questions over and over and over again. So another thing that we hear all the time is people getting frustrated with friends and family who don't support their new lifestyle. So what advice can we give for people who are experiencing this frustration?
Yeah, this is a really great topic. And I also love this topic because there's so many different scenarios and ways to approach this particular one. Because one way is to ask for support. And, asking for support can come in the form of many different people in your life. It could be from your physician. It could be from your friends and family. But asking for support from the people who are in your life that you are in a process of trying to achieve your best health, and this is how you plan to do it, and I would like your support in my approach, and is that something you're willing to do? The other approach is to stay connected with what you believe. Basically, remember that you have the right to stay in your lane and protect yourself and take care of yourself the best way you know how. And if that means that you're choosing a diet full of nutritious, healthy foods that are going to keep you healthy longer, then that's your right. And you don't really owe anybody an explanation for that. You have the right to choose what you put into your body. And if somebody does have questions or they're questioning why you're following this approach, you may want to let them know that you're choosing this approach for your health. And sometimes just keeping it really simple, keeping it at a very minimal response, not going too far into the details, just this is for my health. A lot of times that will allow people the space to make what they want of that. They don't have to know all the details. It's maybe none of their business. And that's okay. It's okay for you to make the choices you're making for yourself in your own way. And then the other thing that I see happening a lot especially in this world of food choices is we feel the need that we find something we're really excited about and then we want to go tell everybody about it. And when we do that, sometimes it can come across as we're educating them to something, and sometimes people don't want that information. It's just like you have the right to choose what you eat, they have the right to choose what they eat. So I would take the approach of inform somebody, but don't educate. I'm choosing this for my health rather than oh my gosh, I saw this documentary and it was amazing. And I have all these, I learned all this stuff, keep that stuff inside a little bit and allow people to come to you for more information rather than sort of putting it all out there, because sometimes that can lead to questions and conversations that you might not feel prepared for or even want to discuss. And then the other thing is to just keep it simple responses. I feel better when I eat this way. And if somebody is interested in learning more information, it's a great idea to be prepared to share with them the things that resonated for you. So this would be a good opportunity to say, oh, I saw this really interesting documentary, and it just like one thing, it spurred on my interest, and maybe you'd be interested in it. And, so when somebody's interested, they'll come to you for information and will maybe ask more from you. And that's a good time to introduce what you've learned.
Okay, so how about a situation where people are experiencing genuine criticism, like a family member is just really criticizing and going after somebody for not eating things like meat, dairy, and eggs, and they're saying you have to have it, it's very important. How do you, what suggestions do you have for somebody dealing with a situation like that?
Yeah, that's very real, and that happens for a lot of people. There's plenty of people out there that are going to say those types of things to you. I would say first, take a breath and remember that, you have the right to your choice and your opinion as much as they do. So in that way, it may not make you happy and it may not feel great when somebody's criticizing you, but it's also not your job to change their mind, to change anybody else's mind. The only mind that you have to change is your own. And so if you stay on your own path and focus on what you know is best for your body and trust in the choices that you've made for your health, then you don't have to take on their criticism. You can just sort of let them know this is my choice, and leave it at that. And if somebody is trying to engage in a heated conversation, it's okay to walk away. It's okay to not engage in that conversation if you don't feel comfortable. Enjoying the food that you're eating is the best payoff in the world. So, be prepared with foods if you're with friends and family, or if you're around people that may sort of be in that critical place. Bring food along that you really enjoy eating so that you feel good about the food that's on your plate. And even despite somebody else's exterior criticism. It's also okay to give yourself permission to take care of yourself in the best way possible. So I like to think of it as like sort of protecting your bubble. You protect this space around you, and reminding yourself in situations that you might be entering that you have the right to choose the food that's on your plate, and go prepared to choose to believe that your choices and what you've learned to be true. The other thing that you can do is sort of simply say things like, I feel great. When you talk about how you're feeling when you're adopting a low-fat, plant-based diet, is that most people are saying how good they feel, right? They have all this energy and I'm excited and I love the food that I'm eating. Share your feelings, your joy. That's what people are going to, when people notice how you're feeling and that you feel better, then it's really hard to argue with that.
Amen. Actually, one of the things that I think you hit on the head here is that when you first make a transition to a plant-based diet, a lot of the times you feel the need to have to, just like you're saying, educate other people about it. Oh, hey, let me tell you about this. Let me show you this. And a lot of times people, like you're saying, they're sort of like, I don't really want to, I don't care. Like, hate to break it to you, but I'm not really that interested right now. And that's okay, just like you're saying, right? I remember when I first made my plant-based transition about 15 years ago, that I was so excited by all the changes that I saw that I almost felt like I was, shoving it down people's throats. Where like anytime there was a food conversation or, anytime there was food presented, I would just start talking. And then at a certain point I was like, people don't really care as much as I do, right? So I love what you said, because I think it's very, very important for people to understand that like their journey does not necessarily mean that other people are that interested. And people will ask you over the course of time if they're interested, but it's not necessarily your responsibility to have to go out and tell people this is the way to do it, or this is what I'm doing, because it might be just too much for them, right?
Yes, I could not agree more.
Well, hey, Kylie, I wanted to thank you so much for being here with us today, because you've been a wealth of knowledge, and you provide support to all of our clients every single day. But actually, before we go, I got one last question for you. What is the number one challenge that you see people face when it comes to lifestyle change? And what would you recommend to overcome this specific problem?
Well, that's a good question. I think, to be honest, I think the biggest challenge is overcomplicating things. What I would recommend to overcome that would be to just keep it really simple. Keep it simple, choose whole fruits and vegetables, make simple choices, have simple responses when you're communicating with, friends and family. Just keep it simple and, listen to your body. Your body's going to give you a lot of great information. And when you learn to trust more and more in what your body's telling you and the information your body's giving you, it makes this process a lot more fun. So, I think keep it simple, trust your body.
I love that. That's great. Keep it simple.
Amen to that. Well, thank you so much for being here today, Kylie. I get the pleasure of spending a lot of time with you, and I know our members absolutely love interacting with you. So thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for helping out and educating people about how specifically to communicate. Because in this summit, we talk a lot about what foods to eat, how much foods to eat, how to lose weight, and all the sort of logistical details. But there's not as much of a focus on communication, and I think that's something that you bring to the table that's truly unique. And, a lot of the strategies that you have are really, really effective. So thank you very much for doing this.
You're very welcome. It was my pleasure. Thank you.